Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for some of you. This is Paul Nathanson with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell, and welcome to the Washington Policy and COVID-19 update presented by the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell and our friends from the Franklin Partnership. This is our 28th webinar for those of you keeping score at home. And as you should know by now, Franklin Partnership is Omar Nashashibi and John Guzik, who are joining me on this call, and they provide advocacy and lobbying services and a host of other services that many of you already use. And I am usually joined by Caitlin Sickles, but she is not with us today. And we are the strategic communications firm and form the PR part of the One Voice team in Washington. There are plenty of ways for you to hear from us and to interact with us in addition to this webinar. Make sure you tune into our podcast called Talking with One Voice, and that is brought to you by NTMA and PMA, and that is available wherever you pull down your podcast, Apple Music, a variety if you have Spotify. So listen to that. We put up a new episode about once every 2 weeks. And then we also have a video that is distributed by NTMA, PMA called 2 Minutes with One Voice, where one of the four of us, we take turns and we talk about an issue of importance to manufacturing. I was up this week, and so my 2 minutes is on one of my favorite topics, and that is getting rid of the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariff. So lots of ways to interact. Please tune into the podcast and the video. And now I'm going to turn it over to John Guzik, and he's going to go over what we're going to talk about today.
Hey, thanks, Paul. The 2 minutes, we named it 2 minutes with One Voice before we ever recorded anything that was only 2 minutes. It's really hard to give a Washington brief with under 2 minutes or under, and most of us have gone over it. But anyhow, thanks everybody for joining us. We know it's been a while since we've had one of these webinars, but still lots going on. We're going to update you on where the CDC and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they gave out some requirements for testing and vaccinations in the workforce. We're going to obviously talk about the CDC announcement yesterday, which made big news regarding the masks. But as we peel back the onion on that one, I think we're going to see that there's some limitations that we all need to be aware of. We're going to update you on some of the unemployment challenges. We've heard from a lot of members on that issue. Finally, probably close the door on the Ppp loan program. I'll update you on that. And then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what everybody's talking about in Washington, and that is the next infrastructure bill that is being developed right now in Congress, the subsequent tax increases that may go along with it. And then we're going to close talking a little bit about the tariffs and our supply chain and how it is impacting members of the NTMA and PMA. So, Omar, there's been a lot that the CDC and the EEOC has done on workplace safety and compliance.
Yeah, that's right, John. And so again, here are the disclaimers. We're not lawyers. You do need to talk to your counsel. Both associations have great partnerships and have already started to put together some materials. But the next several slides here that John and I are going to cover are going to go into just some of the latest that's out there with regards to employer COVID testing. And then obviously we'll get into, as John mentioned, some of the masks and some of the other issues that are starting to pop. But even just in the last week or so, what we've been able to see here is antigen testing and screening. And notice this is the non-healthcare workplaces. So everything we've got here, it definitely seems like CDC is creating that category definition between healthcare and non-healthcare, and you'll see that in the mask wearing as well there. But again, looking at the antigen tests and how they're easy to give, quick return, low in cost, the 15-minute test. The reason we put this in here is, especially as you'll notice down here at the bottom, such as business travelers and those who work in crowded indoor spaces. For some of you that are starting to get back on the road again, and maybe somebody in the HR wants to have that conversation about antigen testing, here are some of the areas that the CDC now puts out there. Keep in mind, this is CDC. As an employer, you've got to worry about 3 different enforcers out there: the EEOC, the CDC, and OSHA. And keep in mind that OSHA still is nowhere near, well, I shouldn't say that, OSHA still has not released what they need to. Here is some of the employee consent and some of the employee requirements, that making sure that it's a job related and consistent with the business need. Something that you're going to notice here, you've got to make sure that you're not discriminating and violating any of the HIPAA requirements that are out there And so when you take a look at the testing personnel who can do it, it's not considered a medical exam. So that is helpful for the employer to know that you're not tripping over that wire that's out there, as well as you can take a look at the different test kits. And also, if you're using a test kit, make sure that there's certain ones that have been provided and approved by the FDA. Again, another regulatory body that's out there for those of you that are using that. And again, different ways to store the storage, the date. Again, trying to create this to protect the employer, that if you have testing, you can prove that a cluster or a spread didn't originate with you. But John, something that we are also talking about here is on the EEOC, where we still don't have vaccination guidance from the EEOC, and we're still relying on a lot of what we had back in December here.
Yeah, and before we do that, I do want to mention one thing, one just clarification. We've mentioned this in the past, but you can, as an employer, ask an employee if they have received the vaccination. You cannot ask them why they did not get the vaccination. So I think that's an important clarification, clarification in the workforce. And EEOC also has expressed concerns about incentive programs where employers may provide an incentive for employees to get the vaccination. That may lead to some discrimination where some people are receiving the incentive, some people do not take the incentive because of a disability or deep religious beliefs moving forward. So I just wanted to clarify those couple things.
Yeah, those are the bullets that are on this slide. Okay, here's the FAQ from December.
Why don't you take that? I've lost my spot.
Yep, and so on the FAQ, so on that previous slide, as we mentioned, these are just, again, we have to go back to what we have from the EEOC. They have not issued this April guidance that they indicated rather last month that was forthcoming. So again, right now, and we're on the one of your association HR listservs, so there's a lot of activity, including this morning, with regards to incentives to vaccinate. I think most of the conversation today was on paid time off and how long do you allow. Keep in mind that Department of Labor does allow certain tax credits for those that are vaccinated. I think it was up to 2 days for those that are recovering, that you could look and getting some reimbursement for that payout. Check that out. It was in a previous presentation. But some of the discussion this morning that was on the listserv went down the line of incentives. And I think that's back to John's point that we have here on this slide that's important to consider. If you're providing an incentive for somebody to get vaccinated, but the other person who chooses or cannot receive a vaccination does not have access to that same type of incentive, you may be discriminating against them. Again, we're not attorneys, but go back to the Obama era in 2015 when they were looking at things to, they were concerned about you dissuading or incentives that would keep people from reporting an incident or an injury. This is more of the days away. If you have, let's say, 100 consecutive days without an incident and you provide an incentive, that could be a discriminatory or for people not wanting to be away from work, that kind of thing. So be careful, talk to your attorneys with regards to that. And that's why we're putting up here something that's not new. You'll notice this date stamp is back in December. But again, and if employer requires a vaccinations when they are available, how should it respond to an employee who indicates that they are unable to receive that vaccination because of a disability? So this K5 answer is the FAQ that you'll want to go to. Afterwards, as always, these slides are available and you can click on the bottom link here that will take you to this full definition so we don't run through it here. And this is the K7 before I turn it back over to John on the reopening recommendations from CDC. The previous one, this is now, that's for a disability was the K5 question. K7, what happens if you cannot provide a reasonable accommodation to an employee who cannot comply with a mandatory vaccine policy because of a disability or religiously held beliefs? So this is the reasonable accommodation provision that they've got in here. And so again, please note, does not mean you can automatically terminate the worker. You're going to have to see if there's some other eligible positions, if there's some other rights that they may have under the Equal Opportunity Act that's out there. So just a heads up that these are not new, but these are coming back up increasingly that we're seeing on the local listservs. But John, especially now, CDC is starting to give us information, but keep in mind that's not OSHA, it's not a local or state.
Yeah, and so, I mean, many of us were surprised by yesterday's announcement by the CDC, which basically lifting the mask requirements for those who are fully vaccinated. That is 2 weeks after their last shot, and eliminating the social distancing guidelines. However, so that's, as I said, the outside of the onion. But then when you peel it back to Omar's point, not only do employers need to deal with the CDC, the EEOC, OSHA, and they also have their state OSHA to deal with. And so the CDC does say that you still must abide by state and local guidelines on mask wear, mask usage. And I was talking to somebody in Michigan this morning where the governor is not going to lift the mask requirement until 70% of the Michigan residents have at least one shot, and they don't expect that till late fall. So for those of you in Michigan, now the governor in the last 24 hours it says she's re-examining the CDC announcement, but that's a state and local requirement moving forward. So some states aren't going to be able to, some people in those states aren't going to be able to eliminate wearing the masks. Furthermore, businesses are allowed to require masks. And as Omar pointed out earlier, this announcement is for non-healthcare related mask wearing because they have maintained the mask requirements, in the healthcare environment. And so, I mean, we just can't reiterate enough. I know, as Omar said, there's been a lot of discussions on listservs on what can we do and what should we do. And what we're suggesting is read these links very carefully. Talk to your lawyer and make sure you understand what is happening at your state and local level before you implement any changes in the workplace.
Yeah, that's right. And Paul Nathanson's shop over at Bracewell, the labor lawyers are sending out a client alert later today that we can also post up on the website and make sure we send it out with the link from One Voice that's going to be titled Employer Considerations in Light of the Updated CDC Recommendations for Fully Vaccinated People. So effectively, just along lines of what John just discussed, you're going to need to talk to somebody that's familiar with your local. As you mentioned, I mean, just look at what Speaker Pelosi's doing. She's still going to require people to wear a mask on the House floor, but that's more of a power play, which is actually kind of funny. So what you should keep doing, again, if you travel, you should continue to take those steps with regards to the flying that they have required. International testing is still required, and also the masks on planes, as John mentioned, looking out for symptoms. Folks, read, even if you're not a sports fan, read what happened to the New York Yankees shortstop. He was COVID tested positive in December. He got a J&J, and he's been fully vaccinated and just got another round of COVID himself, for round 2 this week declared, and he's asymptomatic. So they're always learning, but watch those local guidelines here. And especially if you're required to wear a mask on planes, trains, buses, those will be required to continue there as well. Just quickly also for the fully vaccinated, before I turn it back over to John, and where they talk about updated fully vaccinated, we don't have a solution for you, folks. If people are just going to claim that they're vaccinated and you're outdoors, that's hopefully just going to be on a good policy there for people doing it properly. But they can refrain from testing. This is one that we wanted to put down here. Updated, fully vaccinated people can refrain from testing following known exposure unless they are residents or employees of correctional detention. So meaning that if you have an employee that is fully vaccinated and has been exposed, at least under CDC, and we're waiting on further guidance from OSHA, that at least means that they don't have to go back and get tested. Again, that's subject to change. But John, you're right, they do have a graphic artist that seems to be having fun at CDC.
Yeah, I think this is an animator wannabe who didn't get a job at Disney, is now working for the CDC. If you remember months back, we had little cartoon characters about social distancing and where to put placards to demonstrate social distancing. But this is something that you could easily print off, put in your workroom, where a clear visual for those of you who are visual learners, what vaccinated people and unvaccinated people can and can't do on an indoor and outdoor basis. It's the stoplight approach, green, yellow, red, and it's pretty clear, so everybody knows what is the CDC saying is allowable, under these new guidelines moving forward. And then we also want to look at, and depending on where you are, where are the states, because each state is reopening at different levels. I know there's been a lot of discussion about, for example, what's going on in Florida, but what this map demonstrates is a lot of parts of the country, the dark blue are the ones that are opened up more than, for example, the states that are in white or in lighter colors. And so this just gives you an idea of where the country is in the reopening phase.
Yep, and similar, breaking it down a little bit further, and this one's literally changing by the minute here. Literally, somebody just asked or just posted a comment here. Michigan just lifted it, same as CDC, but MyOSH, which for you non-Michiganders, that's their OSHA in Michigan, hasn't changed their emergency rules yet. I think that is more of a frustrated comment than more of an FYI. And that's something that we fully understand, we share, since again, a lot of what we just shared with you on CDC may not fully apply to you yet, depending on your state, and certainly until we get the OSHA guidance. But here's a little bit more on the 15 states that have ended the federal unemployment subsidy. This is something that obviously a lot of our members have raised concern about over time. We did a survey of our membership in January we asked the question, can you prove, excuse me, do you have people that have not returned to work because of the $300 extra federal unemployment? 20% responded that yes, they've had people turned down that are able to come back to work and they can prove that it was because of the federal unemployment subsidy. Another 20% or 25% rather said yes, they suspect it's because of the federal subsidy but couldn't prove it, and the others either did not know or said no. So that's a pretty sizable number in terms of we were able to demonstrate in terms of that status. So here's some of those states that are starting to say we are opting out of the federal program. And so that extra $300 payment, let's just get out ahead of this, folks. The $300 payments, they are not going away unless the law is changed, and the law will not be changed on that issue. So it's going to be up to the individual states. But we are hearing, and we did hear directly from the president, that he does want to make sure that if they're offered a suitable job, they have to take that job or lose their unemployment benefits. Now, our response to try to be helpful to many of you all when we've gotten this question come up, other than as, hey, you may have dodged a bullet if that's the type of person that you really don't want in your shop anyway. Here's an example of Illinois, of all places. They do have a webpage called Refusal of Work Reporting Form. Every state under a law that John and I worked on is requiring this. So every state has to have this now, some kind of a refusal of work reporting form or a fraud reporting form for unemployment. Again, defer to you all on what might be the best way to either get these people back to work or at least tell these folks that they can't just sit and keep collecting when there's jobs open. But John, that's something that we certainly continue to hear about, but this is one of the recourse. We do believe that there will be additional guidance coming from the Department of Labor, hopefully in the coming weeks or month or so, that will further reinforce to states that they do have to continue and expand on the enforcement that's been happening with this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then we've also have been waiting on the White House and on the emergency temporary standard put forth by OSHA. It was sent over to the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs a couple weeks ago. I actually did my 2 minutes with one voice on the emergency temporary standard last week, where I said we expected it imminently, because typically when a standard or a rule gets sent over to that office, it generally takes them 10 to 14 days to put the final touches on a rule. But as this calendar demonstrates, is OIRA is still holding meetings, on this emergency standard moving forward. And Omar and you and I haven't talked about this, but I can't help but wonder what impact does that CDC announcement on masks have on what OSHA is going to do on the emergency temporary standard. I sort of agree with you that they're probably going to maintain some sort of mask requirement in the workplace, but that may have put a little kink in the wheel of why this emergency temporary standard hasn't moved forward.
What we're hearing on the ETS is, and assuming it doesn't significantly change beyond what we've heard, that it will be binding and go through November. They are going to be a lot harsher than the CDC was in terms of differentiating between the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated. While the CDC, as you saw, took more of a glass half full approach, and they said, here's what you can do now that you're vaccinated. We are hearing that the OSHA rather is going to take a more of, in your workplace, you do have to find a way to, again, within EEOC ADA guidelines and HIPAA, be able to take a look at who is vaccinated and try to treat that accordingly. And will that include remaining of barriers and face masks? Those are some things that we've heard the answer likely is yes, but that again, that could change. So what this calendar tells you, that we obviously, as of right now, today's the 14th, you will not be getting the new ETS until the meetings are concluded. So now our new target date is probably a week from today, we're hopeful, unless you see further changes. And again, that will be from the federal government, OSHA, that will probably still closely follow the fourth update that I think California just did to theirs. So that's, again, as John mentioned, a lot of moving pieces and parts over there. Just quickly, something that we all knew, but just to reinforce to some of you and your CPAs, since we've got a few on this here, switching over to the PPP loans, IRS notice that came out between our last conversation and this one with regards to your Ppp1 deductions. Again, some of you may have filed for your taxes back, you remember, September 15th on quarterly, and doing some of the deduction of expenses paid or incurred during that taxable period. This tells you your safe harbor that the taxpayers may elect to deduct the expenses on their original federal income tax return, or looking at trying to find other ways to do rather than filing an amended return or adjustment request. So this is your safe harbor, that in case that you were not taken care of or you didn't feel comfortable with the retroactivity that we took care of in December for you. Here's now the IRS reinstating that. But John, you mentioned it earlier, we're closing the door on the PPP so far, it looks like.
You have the Paycheck Protection Program is basically out of money. They're no longer accepting applications. And here's a brief summary of where we are. 191,000 PPP loans have been issued to the manufacturing industry, over $21 billion, which is roughly 8% of all the funding that was put forth in the PPP program. The next slide is a little more troubling for us, and it hasn't really changed much. And this shows, there's the forgiveness process, and this is, of 2020 loans, 5.2 million loans were issued, but only 3.1 million loans have been forgiven, leaving 1.9 million of you who took a PPP loan who've not asked for forgiveness on your loan. And so if there are any of those on this webinar today, we do encourage you to submit your forgiveness forms so that these numbers can improve.
Anybody over 2 million, if you're seeing any movement on your forgiveness, let us know. We've been pushing Hill staff that's been talking to SBA as well, and there's a lot of issues going on at SBA right now. There's a lot of, there are going to be additional investigations into the EIDL program. We heard this week House Republicans are calling for an investigation. All the Republicans on that small business committee said that there's problems with EIDL in terms of fraud and abuse, and we're starting to hear of some of that as well. So let us know if you are seeing any movement on the over 2 million specifically. SBA is definitely bogged down, and so we're hearing delays, which we assume you all are hearing as well on forgiveness on that step. But John, why don't we go through what do you think is the timing? The geeks like me in town, we've been waiting for what we call the Green Book. We heard it was coming in mid-March, then we heard it was coming right after tax day, then we heard it was mid-May. And now the Green Book's not going to come out till the end of this month, which basically dictates the government's tax policy and proposals and the incomes and outs. And that usually kicks off tax conversations here in town amongst lobbyists.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's set the stage here. The president has proposed 2 different infrastructure bills, one more roads, bridges, broadband, et cetera, a $2.3 trillion package, and then a $1.8 trillion family infrastructure program. And so Senate Republicans have put together a compromise. It's just the roads and bridges package. It's not the 2.3 trillion, but it's $568 billion. Last weekend, Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader, had indicated that Senate Republicans may be able to go up to $800 billion in a true infrastructure program. But this proposal submitted by the 5 or 6 Senate Republicans did not have a pay for. It did not indicate specifically how these programs would be paid for. And they had a meeting yesterday with President Biden. He asked them to come back with a new proposal, and we expect it to be at the $800 billion level. They will lay out some of those user fees, maybe miles driven or other proposals out there to help to pay for that $800 billion program. But I mean, I think Omar and I are concerned or believe that there are some in Congress who think that $800 billion is still too low, when some in Congress are looking at a $4 trillion package, and then they're going to be looking at this $800 billion program. But the challenge in this $4 trillion program is the pay fors in itself. And to Omar's point, the president made several recommendations, but indicated, people under 400,000 would not raise taxes, but he raised corporate taxes. In the end, when the president submits its Green Book, which Omar said is now going to be at the end of May, it will clarify, give us some guidance on the tax strategies that the White House is looking at, because there's no universal decision or agreement within the Democrats of what the spending should look like and what taxes should look like. The members in New York and high tax states like New York, New Jersey, and California want relief from the state and local tax cap. But people like Bernie Sanders says that's supporting the rich, and so there's conflict there. Bernie wants to increase Medicare, expand Medicare, while others in the Democrat conference do not. And so we are seeing, so while there's bipartisan talks, there's also division within the Republicans and the Democrats. And the Democrats are going to need to probably decide by Memorial Day, by the end of the month, to see what kind of legislative approach are we going to do? Are we going to work in a bipartisan way in this solution that we initially seeing at the White House, or is it going to be utilizing the budget reconciliation process where we only need the 51 votes like we did on the last relief package. And so they're going to, so we believe that the bipartisanship is going to last probably through the end of the month, and then a decision will have to be made. And I think, Omar, you would agree with me that there's probably going to have to be, they're going to have to do a Democrats go to loan approach, because Republicans, for example, they don't want to touch the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the Trump tax cut bill, anything that would change that, they're going to oppose it. And so that would be, raising the corporate rate from 20 to 28 or 25%. It would be violating that rule of not touching it. President Biden has indicated he's willing to negotiate with what that corporate rate is going to be. And so I think we're still in this happy bipartisanship feeling in Washington, but I think it's only going to last a couple more weeks.
Well, they're not really, the people that are talking are a group of Senate Republicans and Joe Biden. House Democrats aren't bothering, Senate Democrats aren't bothering, and I think it's for the obvious reasons. Now, you had the Big Four meeting the other day, and you did it just so you could, and just so McCarthy could go out and do what he did on the lawn. But for the most part, these talks, I think from what we're hearing, and we've been dealing with the White House on a couple of issues on workforce and on trade over the last week, and the sense that we're getting here is staff are going to be the ones that hold the president back. The president is trying to get to yes. That's why he asked for asked for Republicans to come back with a second proposal next week. And that took his staff by surprise. His staff aren't really interested in playing that much ball with Republicans. They, I think, are closer to where the House and the Senate Democrats are and just rolling through. But to give you an idea of timelines, and so many of you are in the tax preparation world need to start thinking about your strategies, and many of you in the business world need to start thinking about your investments. And even retroactively, there are increasing talks about some of the challenges that we may have. If we do have retroactivity, right now our biggest focuses are going to be on that cap gains, on estate tax, net operating loss, LIFO, and one other area was probably going to be the big areas that we are focused on retroactivity. The committees have begun to hold. Yeah, the committees have begun to hold their hearings, which means that we're going to have a process that plays out in the House and the Senate. There is daylight between the House Ways and Means tax writer and the White House right now with regards to the priorities that they have out there. The meetings that we've had right now have largely been focused on the pass-through issues, on 199A, on deductions, on 163J, on interest, and also on the R&D tax credit, are starting to heat up a little bit with some significant concerns in the R&D community with regards to what's going to be around the corner on amortization. What our concern right now is on the stepped up basis. We said this last time, but we did just have a group of Democrats start to weigh in of their concerns on behalf of small businesses and on family farms with regards to the impact there on capital gains and also on the estate tax. So watch out for some development. The timeline that we're looking for is Memorial Day. Again, the Green Book, but also you're going to start seeing Democrats flesh out a lot of what their priorities are. They're going to have to start moving a budget resolution that's going to include the reconciliation instructions. And once we have that, that's when you'll probably expect bipartisan talks to come to an end. So your next marker for looking out for where we might be on taxes, we would suggest check back in around June 2nd or 3rd that week. We'll have a good idea of what looks likely and unlikely as we march towards an infrastructure bill that the House Transportation Committee Chairman wants done by July 4th. But speaking of taxes, Paul, tariffs are taxes. And I think a lot of our members right now continue to see that certainly on a daily basis, whereas taxes, you feel them quarterly.
It's catchy, isn't it? We should do a website, tariffsaretaxes.org. Wait, we already did one. That's our Coalition of American Metal Manufacturers and Users website. We don't have to tell you that steel prices continue to be very, very high, and as important, they are relative to your competitors in Europe and China and other places. They remain high, so we are actively working, continuing our advocacy in Washington, D.C. to bring this issue to our to elected officials and policymakers. CAMU keeps track of the hot roll price that you see on the left-hand side, and through Steel Benchmarker, which is sends out a report every 2 weeks. As you can see, the CRC price is on the right-hand side. Our coalition steel price update also includes the capacity utilization rate of the domestic steel industry. as some of you know, the justification for the capacity for the steel tariffs was to bring the U.S. Domestic steel production, their capacity utilization rate to 80%. One can argue why the U.S. government is guaranteeing a utilization rate of any industry, but there you have it. The fact is that it went up to over 80% within 6 months after the tariffs were implemented in March of 2018. Then, of course, it dipped for a while during the pandemic, but it's back up to 78% here. On plate price, you can see the wide differences between the US in blue and China in red. And so we are emphasizing that how our members are supposed to compete, how our steel using, metal using manufacturers who have over 6.8 million workers in the US are supposed to compete when you're protecting the domestic steel industry that has 140,000 workers. So something needs to be done. Since our last call, thanks to Omar, John, others on this call, PMA and NTMA really spearheaded an effort that brought on other metal using trade associations to send a letter to President Biden. This time the letter was signed by companies. We had over 300 companies sign on, many of them NTMA and PMA members. The letter not only was delivered to the White House, and Omar and John and others delivered it to various agencies and to members of Congress. We've also distributed to the media. You saw a press release, and here's the letter and just a screenshot of some of the companies that signed on. We've had pretty good media coverage. I know there's a New York Times story coming out. St. Louis Post-Dispatch is doing a story, still looking to talk to Missouri manufacturers if we have any manufacturers up there. The emphasis obviously is that we've tried to write this letter so that to urge President Biden to do the right things, and we tried to avoid red flags. We said one thing that we said that the steel market is suffering from a variety of factors. Why do we have a steel shortage, long lead times, high steel prices? There's a variety of factors, whether it's COVID related, whether it's shutdowns, strikes, particularly in stainless, consolidation, but also the tariffs. And there's really only one thing that the administration can do directly and quickly, and that would be to terminate the tariffs. So you can see the letters on the tariffsaaretaxes.org website. We are going to continue to do the media, and I know Omar and John are going to continue to do their advocacy activities.
Yeah, we got a question that just came in on this saying, did you get feedback from the White House that Biden or staff saw the letter? Yes, we did. We sent it over to the National Economic Council's point person on manufacturing, and she copied 3 of her colleagues in her response to us. In addition, the Office of Public Engagement, which is the new Office of Public Liaison, OPE's head person also, or deputy person, wrote back to us, the number 2 there, and confirmed their receipt. So they have seen it over there. We also had a call with the U.S. Trade Representative's office earlier this week, where we also brought up the tariff issues, and that person, she had already also seen that letter, even though she wasn't one of the people we sent it at USTR, which is good. That means the people we also sent it there had circulated it around. I'll turn it over to John here in a second to talk through some of what we're hearing up on the Hill, but maybe if I could just give a quick prediction, and then John can give the actual substance, because this is just my speculation. And I'll start with this center bullet here. The G7 meetings in the United Kingdom are coming up here on June 11th through, really the 10th through the 13th. So what that tells us is typically in a normal administration, you will have the parties that are getting ready to meet offer up some kind of an olive branch or a fig leaf, whatever you want. And in this case, we think the Europeans might delay, and this is just speculation, might delay the doubling of tariffs on US exports slated to take effect on June 1. And so what they would do is potentially offer up a 30-day delay of those June 1 tariff doubling on US exports if they're getting close to a deal. Our understanding is a deal to remove or at least change the US tariff policy on the European Union would have to involve some kind of agreement between the US, EU, and OECD on Chinese overcapacity. So whether that's restrictions on imports going into the Europe, which they already have, or some other kind of excess capacity agreement where the Europeans will put a limit on their own production. That's to be seen, but we're getting the sense that we're getting pretty close to at least the EU and the US coming to agreement. I still don't think they'll go cold turkey and lift the tariffs outright without putting in some kind of a quota system. But John, I do have a feeling that sometime in the next 30 to 45 days, we might get to see something, hopefully something on the US EU side, at least, and possibly Japan.
Yeah, and we've been talking about this for weeks now. And the USTR Ambassador Tai, she testified for the House Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committee this week, and she did provide a lot of insight. And she was very optimistic, on the discussion on the talks between the EU and US. And so I share Omar's optimism that, perhaps at that G7 meeting in mid-June, there may be an announcement of some movement of some sort. But it was interesting at that hearing where you had a chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Chairman Wyden from Oregon, who made the made the statement that he hears from his colleagues nearly every day on the steel and aluminum tariff. And so that means the work that we are doing, the work that you are doing, I mean, we are getting heard in the halls of Congress, and that, at some point members start walking the other way when they see us walking up, because, we're going to be, we talk about the steel aluminum tariff issue. To Omar's point, our fingers are crossed. I mean, as much as I would like to see an announcement in June saying that they're going to lift these tariffs, I do suspect there will be a delay. I agree with Omar in the implementation of the doubling of the retaliatory tariffs in that June announcement.
Yeah, on the China side, the pressure does continue. So there is no chance of lifting tariffs on China outright. We don't see anyone really talking about that legitimately in town. We do increasingly see some kind of an exclusion process reopening. A source has told us this week that to expect, they don't know when, but to expect a Federal Register notice at some point asking for public input with regards to policy towards China, including with regards to likely the exclusion process and the tariffs and the effect that they've had. So we'll keep you posted on that. Again, that individual didn't give us a timeline for when we could expect that call for public input, but they did also indicate it would not just be from their agency, but it would probably be coming from the same time from 2 or 3 agencies all seeking input on China policy at the same time. And before we turn it over here to Paul for the media, we didn't really touch on this here, but there have been a lot of hearings and movement on Capitol on the Senate side, rather, and now on the House with regards to supply chains and regulations and moving against China and increasing the National Science Foundation's ability to work with manufacturers on innovation and R&D and creating manufacturing innovation hubs around the country. Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, has said he will pass a bill through the Senate by the end of this month, and we believe that he will. The House is moving through its own a little bit different, and so just know there's a lot happening this month when it comes to trade, as Paul will tell you. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so these are just a few of the headlines we've made over the last couple of weeks, and not only on steel and aluminum and red metal issues with supplies and lead times, but also workforce issues, which we know continue to be a challenge, as we talked about earlier in this webinar, and also promoting some events that both NTMA and PMA are doing. So we'll continue the media battle, and the focus on trying to get Washington's attention continues. And just another thank you to all the manufacturers who are on this call who are willing to speak to the media. We are always looking for folks who are out there. The reporters are interested in talking to you. We're happy to give you a quick training or to be on the call with you. So just let us know or contact us through your associations, and I know both associations have some media volunteer forms that you could fill out, and we'll call on you when we have a media inquiry.
Yep. Speaking of associations, John, we're still.
Yeah, we want to thank everybody who have dug deep into their pocketbooks and made contributions to the NTMA GAF Government Affairs Advocacy Fund, or PMA's Advocacy Fund. This is what allows us to keep these webinars going, the 2 minutes with one voice, our podcast. It helps us, with your support to continue the work that we are doing. And so for those of you who haven't considered making a contribution, we hope you would consider making the contribution today. Just click on the link below, and they'll take your credit card on this. Again, this is a corporate contribution, not a personal contribution.
That's right. We appreciate everyone's support over the last however now many months. Throughout that process, please feel free in the right-hand corner. You can enter in any questions that you may have that we'll try to answer either now or get back to you later on. Again, appreciate everyone's patience throughout this process. And I think you're going to need a little bit more patience within your workplaces. We would caution over the next 2 weeks between now and Memorial Day, there's going to be a lot of confusion locally, a lot of confusion at your state level, and certainly, as usual, coming out of here in town in DC. Until we get more information from the federal OSHA, we are concerned about the environment in terms of workplaces and what is and what is not permitted. So as I once learned a long time ago, the answer is usually whatever is safest. Consult with your attorneys, consult with your associations. As John mentioned, we've got our next podcast is going to be recorded next week, so look out for that on that platform. In addition, we will have our next webinar for One Voice that addresses COVID and infrastructure. That'll be on Friday, June 25th at noon Eastern. A notice will go out to all of you from then for Friday, June 25th at noon Eastern. By then, we'll be closer to that July 4th deadline. The House Infrastructure Committee Chairman has set for moving an infrastructure bill through his committee, and hopefully we'll have an idea then, I think, John, about what some of those taxes look like.
Yep.
Seeing no questions coming in, thank you, everybody. And please, as always, reach out to Christy or Bill and NTMA and PMA, and have a great weekend.